let's start in Glasgow this morning. Jane is there. Morning, Jane.
Good morning.
Morning. What's your question for Alex?
My question for Alex is about the Equality Act, and I think the Liberal Democrats do not support amending the Equality Act to define sex as biological sex, but also talk about in their manifesto about a category of non-binary. So I'm interested in hearing from him how he would define non-binary, particularly difficult, I would have thought, considering they can't even define woman as being an adult human female. So how would he define non-binary? And how does he see that having an impact on the Equality Act and the protection of women's single-sex spaces when it's a further category that's going to enable males to access women's spaces, services, sports, as currently happening?
Okay, thank you, Jane. Alex.
Well, morning to you, Jane. Thanks for your question. This speaks to, a debate that's very big in our community at the moment. And I think it's, unfortunately, the debate has been derailed in large part. There's a lot of anger out there. And I understand that anger. There's people with legitimate questions about that. Liberal Democrats, to answer your question directly, first and foremost, we recognise that non-binary people exist. The Equalities Act of which you speak has been in place for a number of decades now. And rightly so. It protects vulnerable groups. And that, there are provisions within the Equality Act to protect female spaces if there is a need to do so. And actually, I think this all comes back to, the question of gender recognition. And let's take that head on. I think that the courts have shown that we need to move forward on a four-nations basis. I don't think that the government answered the concerns of the public or brought people with them, but yet a humane approach to gender recognition is still an unanswered question. So I think Lib Dems would want to take the heat out of the debate. We want to go back to first principles and bring communities with us, answering questions as we could.
And what about women? What about 52% of the population?
And in terms of
safeguarding them,
well, there is actually provision, an act rather slowly, I have to say. We've been pressing the SNP to bring this forward, but an actual act of Parliament coming to Holyrood, which will act on the recommendations of the report by Baroness Helena Kennedy in terms of defining misogyny, defining violence against women and girls, and bringing in further protection. And we need that. My goodness. We have seen, we don't need to go too far to find very high profile, tragic examples of how we still don't get misogyny right in this country, and we still aren't doing enough to protect women and girls.
Jane, has that reassured you?
I'm afraid very much not. No. Alex still hasn't given any kind of answer as to what exactly non-binary is. How are we going to define in legislation a category that is based on social construction of gender? It's not possible to define non-binary. So how can that be afforded protection in law? He says that the Equality Act protects female spaces. That is patently, obviously untrue, because we have the Equality Act, but we currently have, and in Scotland, never mind in the rest of the UK or internationally, we have males playing in female sports. We have males in female prisons. We have males running rape crisis centres. We have women having to go to court, still going to court, to defend their rights to single-sex spaces. The Equality Act is just being destroyed by the other actions that are as if we had self-ID. And Alex is disingenuous in trying to put all this on the SNP government in Scotland, although clearly they are hugely responsible for this mess that we're in.
You're right. The Liberal Democrats and Labour supported the legislation originally on this.
They supported amendments that were going to prevent rapists and sex offenders being able to change their gender.
All right, Jane, give him a chance to answer. Give him a chance to answer here, Jane. Okay, Jane, hang on a second. We'll give him a chance to answer, Alex.
So there's a lot to unpack there, Jane. Let's start with non-binary and defining non-binary. The vast majority of people, when they're born, their biological sex matches their gender, but that's not true for everybody. And the very small minority of people find that different, and that they can be entirely a different gender or non-binary. And actually, we've just heard today that we're going to have the census report data published today for the first time, defining who the trans status of our communities and also their sexuality. But one of the things that National Records of Scotland have recommended is that in the future we should be looking into finding out who's non-binary. And yes, it's a difficult thing to legislate for. I absolutely recognise that. But let me also talk about the other areas you discussed and say sports. I think that really should be for the governing bodies of the sports in question as to who's allowed to compete in which discipline. In terms of prisons, it's not for politicians to decide. That's a dynamic risk assessment from the Scottish Prison Service. And actually, the last time I looked, there were 11 trans women in Scottish prisons, 9 of whom were in the male estate. And that was based on an assessment of risk by the Scottish Prison Service.
But we expect politicians to give leadership on this, Alex, not to dodge the questions of responsibility on somebody else.
No, indeed. But actually, I don't know the security concerns of a prison in the same way that Scottish Prison Service do. And we don't legislate for that. That should be, and rightly is, a focus of them. But this all comes back to, making people feel heard. And I recognise that some people haven't felt that they've been heard in this debate.
Yeah, Labour's West Streeting says that Labour has lost women's trust over the trans issue. Would you accept that's the same for the Scottish Liberal Democrats?
I think there may be a reality for some women that is the case.
What do you say to those women this morning?
That we're listening, that we want to bring you with us, that we're not going to ride roughshod over your concerns, that, let's talk about them. Let's take the heat out of the discussion. And I should say, when we debated this over the gender recognition reform bill, it did unite the Parliament, actually the recognition that we needed a humane approach to gender recognition. And it wasn't just Labour and the Lib Dems. Some Conservative members did as well. The Conservative Justice spokesperson, the Conservative Health spokesperson, and the respected former leader of their party, Jackson Carlaw, all voted for it because they recognise that actually right now the process that we adopt to get people recognised, and let's say a gender recognition certificate is not a passport. It doesn't get you somewhere today that you weren't allowed yesterday. It just allows trans people to have their gender recognised in the legal architecture that underpins their lives. Nothing more, nothing less. And actually, 300 million people around the world live in countries where this already happens, and actually a lot of those fears haven't been realised. But I recognise we need to bring people with us. We need to, in a calm and respectful manner.
Better than you have been so far.
Potentially so. And like I say, I go back to the nature of this. I don't think the SNP did anything to try and assuage concerns or engage with people who had questions about safety. And I think that was wrong.
Okay.